Russia is currently engaged in aggression against Ukraine, with repercussions felt not only in Ukraine, but across Europe and the West. Since February 24, 2022, when Russian forces invaded Ukraine, between 10,000 to 16,000 civilians have been killed by Russian cluster bombs, and approximately 444,000 Ukrainian troops have perished. However, the actual toll is likely much higher, obscured by the chaos of war. So far, out of a total of 41 million, 8 million people have become internally displaced by 2023, whereas 8.2 million people have fled the country, leading to Europe experiencing its largest refugee crisis since World War II, rekindling memories of the Second World War, which had been the last time a European country had been attacked. The Russia-Ukraine war is the West's very own nightmare on Elm Street, and the latest statistics are terrible news for the future of Ukraine. However, the problem is that the Ukraine war will not just define the future of one country in the middle of the crisis. Its results will mean bloom or doom for the rest of Eastern Europe and eventually Central Europe, revisiting the domino effect. While Ukraine has continued to crash and burn, how has Europe reacted? Or more precisely, how has France behaved since the first shot was fired? You see, with a nuclear capability supported by the biggest, most powerful military in the EU, aided by a state-of-the-art defense industry, a seat at the UN Security Council, and a no-nonsense security pact with the UK, France is not a featherweight contender, and its voice holds a lot of sway in European defense. Yet Europe and its allies have been particularly disappointed with France's wishy-washy approach to the increasing Russian belligerence since 2014, and its shenanigans in Crimea. But things are changing, and Macron's declaration at a press conference on the 26th of February that France would contribute to and support the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine has raised a lot of eyebrows. So what's cooking in the French kitchen, and why has the French vegan turned carnivore lately? Let's unwrap this onion layer by layer to understand the shift. The French connection. France's foreign policy in relation to Europe is undergoing an extreme makeover. The tough-as-nails approach its president Emmanuel Macron has adopted is a far cry from the policy of appeasement the West has always accused France of pursuing. And the West wasn't wrong, really. You see, France has never been a fan of the EU and NATO playing hardball in Eastern Europe to bring it under its influence. It's previously argued that meddling in Eastern European countries would destroy the fragile balance of power there and make the region volatile due to Russia's reaction. Well, that's exactly what happened. It was so invested in its kid gloves policy that it blocked Ukraine from immediate NATO membership in 2008 in collusion with Germany. Paris had sincerely dreamt of seeing the day that Russia and its Western neighbors would bury the hatchet, and Western Europe would build a workable relationship with Moscow to take the edge off. It even tried to romance Russia to secure its cooperation on key issues through the Brégançon initiative launched by Macron in 2019, similar to Nixon's overtures to China in the 70s to thaw the ice between the US and China. Macron wanted to make sure that there was no possibility of Russia cozying up to China by making it best buddies with Europe and inviting it to become a part of the new security structure for Europe. The security roadmap had a 5-point agenda: disarmament, security dialogue, crisis management, fostering common values, and common projects. The goal behind it was to bring about better European and Eurasian integration by securing NATO and EU member states' borders, promising a more productive arrangement with the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, and offering easier management of regional conflicts, including that in Ukraine. Such promises might have been yummy carrots to Russia, but they didn't sit well with Washington, which always favored a more hawkish approach. Speaking of which, who could forget Macron's scathing assessment of NATO's brain death in The Economist? It was a no-brainer that France would drag its feet into adopting a more hostile posture toward Russia and would take more concrete steps toward defending Ukraine. True to form, while other European states took up defensive positions on the eastern front of the European geostrategic chessboard, France took a not-so-surprisingly matronly approach, receiving only a light reprimand for its reckless behavior. Lately, however, it's changed its tune completely, becoming an unexpected new champion for Europe's eastern flank. Now, France is supporting Ukraine's NATO membership and has embraced EU enlargement by bringing Ukraine and Moldova into its fold. It's gone so far as to sign a security agreement with Ukraine, a defense partnership with Ukraine, and enter into an arms deal with Armenia. France is the force behind the establishment of the European Political Community, which is a new European organization established to enhance cooperation between democratic European nations in the fields of security, energy, and the free movement of people, and pointedly, it hasn't invited Russia to the neighborhood party. Macron's also offered to open up the EPC to countries that have left the EU, to Ukraine, and to the Western Balkan states that are seeking to join the EU. All of these actions being accompanied by aggressive language across various platforms. That shift became evident in June 2023 at a conference in Bratislava, where the French president admitted that the Central European countries had been right in their assessment of Russian designs and that his policy of dialogue with Russia had failed. This acceptance preceded the first rhetorical shot on the 26th of February 2024, followed closely by a barrage of vocal fire aimed at Russia. On March 5th, President Emmanuel Macron reiterated his support for sending Western ground troops to Ukraine during a visit to the Czech Republic. Several countries like Lithuania, Estonia, and Canada have come out in support of Macron's views, even as Germany, the US, Poland, and the UK have dismissed any such possibility. It didn't end there. While speaking in Prague, Macron declared that Europeans can't be cowards when countering Moscow. During a meeting with parliamentary leaders on the 7th of March 2024 in Paris, Macron declared that if Russia tried to break through the front line, France would observe no red lines in defending Ukraine. So why has France scaled up hostilities so suddenly? There is a method to the madness, and the reasons all tell us that Macron is not mad at all. His reasons might be regional and international, but they are closely tied to France's interests. Ukraine is the first domino. On the regional front, Ukraine is losing the war, and the stakes are getting higher, but solid support from its Western allies is unreliable. Just look at what happened in Avdiivka recently. Even as Russia was mounting a major attempt to capture the frontline city of Avdiivka in February and had it surrounded on 3 sides with 50,000 soldiers, Ukrainian forces were trying to hold the fort with a dwindling stockpile of weapons by conserving them for the battle ahead. Ukraine relies heavily on Western, predominantly US support, to equip its war-weary forces with the ammunition required to hold off a Russian offensive. Supplies it's running critically low on, even as this border was heating up and the situation was dire. An essential aid bill worth $61 billion was still languishing on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives as the Republican Party tried to keep it tied up in opposition. Meanwhile, D-Day has come and gone in Avdiivka. On the 17th of February 2024, Avdiivka was lost to the Russians. Long described as a gateway to nearby Donetsk, the death toll of 17,000, combined with the loss of 400 tanks in the battle, make this a Pyrrhic victory for Russia, as the loss is higher than what Russia faced in the 10-year war in Afghanistan. Things are so bad that a pro-war Russian military blogger killed himself after criticizing Russian generals for their war strategy. This also shows how determined the Russian war machine is to bring Ukraine to heel, and it seems it just might do that. You see, to the Russian leadership, it was all worth it, as Avdiivka is the gateway to the rest of Ukraine. Its fall marks the biggest win for Russia on the more than 620-mile front line since the fall of Bakhmut in May 2023. Bakhmut is still a hot zone on the front line, along with the areas around Robotynya and Krynki in the south. The southern villages of Robotynya and Verbova in Zaporizhia are also under heavy attack, an area where Ukraine had seen some success during its counteroffensive in 2023, choking Russian supply lines. But Russia has reversed that win by retaking some territory on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River around the village of Krynki, about 19 miles from the city of Kherson. With the war in Ukraine at a decisive point, France is realizing that Ukraine's fall could bring about a series of other Eastern European nations falling victim. Once done with Ukraine, an emboldened Russia would set its sights on newer pastures and unleash the full force of its might on Moldova, the South Caucasus, and the Sahel. Despite these misgivings, the very possibility of a Ukrainian defeat has become a commonly discussed topic, with the former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command, General Sir Richard Barrons, publicly acknowledging this as a distinct possibility in 2024. He's joined by voices like that of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who has come out publicly to state that Ukraine will have to negotiate with Russia to end the war. Many factors are working in Russia's favor, which builds a strong case for outliving and outgunning Ukraine in this war. Firstly, the sanctions haven't made a dent in the Russian economy, with countries like India still doing business with Russia. Its economy has shifted, accommodating its requirements. The Russian defense industry has effectively met the ammunition needs of its forces, with Europe unable to meet Ukraine's. Russian needs for weapons have been topped up with dual-use technology deliveries from Iran and North Korea. Meanwhile, China has fulfilled its need for electrical components and machine tools for arms manufacturing. This has enabled the Kremlin to keep pressure on Ukrainian troops along the front, especially in the Donbass in the east, where Russian forces have increased pressure in recent months. Russian troops are amassed across the border from Kharkiv. Ukraine's second-largest city is under siege by 100,000 to 120,000 Russian troops, leading to mandatory evacuations from 3 districts in the region. Europe knows Ukraine is running out of time, leaving it few options. Shifting geopolitics in Europe. Undoubtedly, the Russian-Ukrainian debacle has tipped the internal balance of power in Europe. Previously, France's Eastern Front was more peaceful than the southern one. Now that reality has flipped, with its biggest threat coming from its immediate eastern neighbor. NATO has become its all-time favorite bodyguard. The black sheep of the region, Poland, has become the all-time favorite frontline state in the war, leaving France and Germany in its dust. In the last couple of years, France and Germany's image has taken a severe beating. Their Ukraine policy is making them look weak, but France is trying hard to unshackle itself from that image and leave it behind. Election season in the U.S. Domestic American politics aren't helping either. There's a very big possibility that Donald Trump might be the next U.S. president, a president who famously denounced NATO as obsolete and has scaled up the discomfort in most European circles. Some of Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail has been particularly vitriolic. Take this gold nugget of wisdom, for example. At a South Carolina event, he declared that he would encourage Russians to do whatever the hell they want to any NATO member who fails to meet spending guidelines. This, combined with the length of time the Ukraine aid bill has been blocked by Republicans in the House of Representatives, has increased Europe's misgivings about the next American administration's willingness to give Europe a free ride. Amid this melee, Macron wants to make his vision for Europe's strategic autonomy from Washington a reality, and wants to prove once and for all that Europe can take care of Kyiv without U.S. support, with France in a leadership role, of course. Thus, the spectacular fireworks on the 26th of February as Macron wrestled the steering wheel from his European counterparts with his statement. That brings us to the regional friction between Europe's heavyweight champions, France and Germany. Tug of war between neighbors. It's clear that German Chancellor Scholz and Macron are finding it hard to get along with each other, or at least that's what it looks like to France. The two just seem to rub each other the wrong way, and it's coming out in things like Germany's refusal to send its long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine, even though France, the UK, and the US have provided similar missiles. Several German politicians and diplomats have criticized France for its relatively light military aid compared to how much Germany has sent in. Of course, this war of words has annoyed France to no end, who has paid it back to Germany with interest. But new developments on France's domestic front will unravel this riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma for us. France comes first. They say that money makes the world go round, but for France, it's Africa. Though Napoleonic dreams of playing a leadership role might play into that situation, the reasons behind Macron's spectacular Russian policy shift lie closer to its second home, Africa. From colonial occupier to benevolent imperialist, France enjoyed its relationship as a dominant benefactor in the African states, which gained their freedom from it not too long ago. After decades of directly ruling over a majority of the poor continent, by the 1960s, de Gaulle could see the writing on the wall that France would be unable to retain its colonial territories. Here started the work of Jacques Fauquiard, advisor to the president who forced 14 African nations into a neo-colonial power bloc called France-Afrique, by hook or by crook, spanning over a quarter of Africa, stretching over 3,000 miles from Senegal on the Atlantic coast to Chad in the continent's center. Fauquiard used all means available, of which he had plenty, being the father of the French Secret Service, to bind the new states into defense agreements that granted France military access to the region. At the same time, he deftly maneuvered the countries into treaties designed to secure strategic materials like cobalt, copper, oil, and uranium from those countries, besides tying their currency to the French franc that would control their economies. This was how France was able to exert tight control over West Africa and the Sahel. Of course, around 30 French direct military interventions between 1964 and 1995 also helped. By giving military support to its favored regimes in Africa, France has enjoyed a great amount of influence, projecting and protecting its interests wherever and whenever required. Programs like reinforcement of African peacekeeping capacities, or the RECAMP program, is a training initiative on the face of it, set up in the late 1990s and established by France, the UK, and the US. But in reality, it allows France a lot of influence on the African regimes. With multiple projects undertaken, like the one in Senegal, it oversees training across all 15 members of the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, including its neighbor, Mauritania. Several thousand French troops are deployed in 7 African countries. Chad has a 1,000-troop French force, with further bases in the capital N'Djamena, Abishi in the east, and a detachment in Faya in the north. Djibouti houses the biggest contingent of 1,500 troops. French elements in Gabon, or EFG, includes a land unit located nearby at the Charles de Gaulle camp in the capital, Libreville, and an air unit at the nearby Guy Pedou Air Base with a total of 350 personnel. The Ivory Coast provides operational control to France through its forward operating base as a part of a defense partnership established in 2014. Around 950 soldiers have been deployed there as part of Operation Licorne, a French peacekeeping force set up in the wake of the 2002 Civil War, which remains there to this day. Senegal has a contingent of nearly 400 troops, named French Elements of Senegal, based at 2 camps in the capital, Dakar. Supposedly to provide training, the EFS is allowed to use the city's military airport with the facility of a high-frequency radio transmitting station near Dakar at Rufisque. And who could forget Niger? With a whopping 1,300 to 1,500 French soldiers deployed, along with fighter planes and drones for counterterrorism operations, now lost to Russian influence after July's coup. That coup is indicative of a strong tide of anti-French sentiment rising in Africa, but France still knows it's all Russia's fault and that this tide is not stemming. It all started back in August 2022 when back-to-back coups in Mali resulted in the new regime expelling 2,400 French troops stationed there, which had to withdraw into neighboring Niger. In September 2023, France suffered another huge blow when Macron was forced to pull his troops and his ambassador out of Niger completely. As the last French soldier stepped off of Niger's soil, the new military leadership promptly closed its airspace to France and contacted the Wagner Group for support to add insult to injury. All the while, the public welcomed the coup with cheering crowds that were seen waving and wearing Russian flags. Just as French soldiers were withdrawing from Mali on its leader Bamako's orders, the Russian mercenary group Wagner's fresh footprints emerged, which seemed to be their new ally. The same pattern has emerged all over areas ceded out of French influence. France had to leave Burkina Faso in February 2023, marking its third loss in the continent, which was followed closely by the Central African Republic. It didn't go unnoticed that the new government in Burkina Faso promptly declared a new strategic partnership with Russia. These pro-Russian military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have disturbed the apple cart, seriously threatening France's African assets in the process. Since 2014, France has deployed some 5,000 soldiers for Operation Barkhane in collaboration with 6 nations of Africa's Sahel region against the Islamic State actors, which it had to withdraw. French losses in the Sahel region are directly a consequence of Russia flexing its muscles and expanding its diplomatic clout in the region with Putin's favorite weapon, the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group, aka PMC Wagner, is a private military company funded by the Russian government, headed by a close Putin ally Yevgeny Prigozhin until he died in 2023. This group is an extension of Russian might when Putin wants his presence established in an area. Russia is also waging sophisticated and coordinated information warfare, targeting France and its allies on the continent, shoring up public outrage against its former colonial master. Russia's disinformation campaign paints France as an imperial force, with Russia as the ultimate liberator from French domination. And it seems to be working. An informal network of troll farms, movie productions, fake social media accounts, pro-Russian African online influencers, and partnerships with local media are being used for its agenda, with links to, once again, the Wagner Group. Wagner's forces have gained traction in Africa at lightning speed. They're conducting lucrative operations in the region, like operating secret gold mines in Sudan and taking over the running of the largest gold mine in the Central African Republic, with expected profits running into $100 million annually. It is enjoying unfettered access to lucrative operations, earning $200 million since 2021 by providing security for Mali against Islamist rebels. It's clear that France is losing this war for the hearts and minds of the African people, and the multiple coups taking place on the continent have flipped all the cards in favor of Russia in the last 2 years. However, the process of de-Frenching Africa is a part of a brilliant strategic move by Russia, and the NATO alliance has been caught unawares. Looking back, this all started in the 1990s. As the NATO alliance crept closer to Russia's sensitive western border, Moscow reacted insidiously by conducting special operations to secure allies in Central Asia, effectively launching a flanking maneuver across 2 continents long before the 2022 Ukraine invasion. The first thrust of this maneuver was seen in 2015 when Moscow vaulted over the NATO barrier of Turkey and opened a massive airbase at Latakia in northern Syria. It utilized the same maneuver in 2021, vaulting over an American ally, Israel, by supplying Egypt with 24 of its advanced Sukhoi 35 fighter jets, bringing its pilots on par with Israelis flying advanced American F-35 fighter planes, which Washington had refused to supply to Cairo. It's been courting Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman to extend its influence further south. Russia's use of the Wagner Group to extend Russian influence across the Sahel was the latest in that maneuver. If Moscow goes on undeterred, it'll have successfully flanked Europe and indirectly the US by forming a geopolitical arc of influence sweeping south through the Middle East and extending west across the whole of the Sahel that stretches from the Red Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. The success of this strategy depended on the end of French influence in Africa, hence the sudden change of old friendships turning into new rivalries. The timing of the about-face of France's foreign policy from Russia is too fantastic to be ignored. Although France suffered the losses of its African territories of influence in the last 2 years, the game has been nearly set a decade beforehand. At one time, it's ruled over 1/4 of the second-largest continent on the blue planet. Now it's lost all of that in space of less than a year, all due to one man, Putin. Macron's belligerent statements are the death rattles of a dethroned king, and it's clear there's not much difference words will likely make. Now check out Could Alliance of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran destroy NATO? Or watch this video instead.